In recent years, Sega have been extremely vocal about their upcoming Super Game, a project that aims to tap into the AAA market segment with some epic Sega franchises. But before there were Super Games, there were Mega Games. And what are Mega Games? Well, that's what we're going to cover here on the Sega Guys right now. I'm Dan the Mega Driver, and if you're from a certain part of the world and of a certain age, then the name Mega Games will instantly bring back a wave of nostalgia. And if not, then join us as we revisit what made this the ideal starter kit for new Sega owners. In 1991, Sega had seen an explosion in popularity, all thanks to a certain Sonic the Hedgehog. This was pronounced in the US where Nintendo had been absolutely dominant for years. But it was also notable here in the UK, where despite Sega having been the number one choice for console players, home computers like the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum still dominated the game charts. However, 1 year after Sonic's unprecedented success, and with a sequel on the way, Sega sought to capitalise on their newfound popularity. Paco Pastor, the president of the Spanish arm of Sega Europe, proposed Mega Games 1, with the 1 represented by a Roman numeral. He presented this to Hayao Nakayama himself with the idea of bundling 3 older Sega Mega Drive games into one cartridge. At the time, production and shipping on cartridge-based games was expensive, so you can theorise that the approach made sense, as opposed to putting out what would be a budget line of cheaper titles. Not too long after that, this cartridge was bundled with new Sega Mega Drive consoles, as well as, or often instead of, Sonic the Hedgehog. This meant that this compilation was everywhere, especially in Europe. Many of you watching now likely have memories of owning or knowing someone who did own this triple pack. In the US, this compilation was renamed Triple Score 3-in-1, but it doesn't seem to be as ubiquitous as the PAL version, so Genesis owners may be watching this wondering, what is all the fuss about when it comes to this compilation? But this cart really was in almost every Mega Drive owner's household on our continent, and it was almost as popular as Sonic the Hedgehog himself. Aside from being bundled with new consoles or a cheap way for existing owners to expand their library, what was it that drew gamers to this compilation? Was it the games? Well, let's take a look. A word of warning first though, viewers, because these are games with a strong nostalgic attachment and are deeply rooted in the European Sega scene. And as such, from this point on, the games captured here will be the PAL version. They're all completely unoptimised, meaning that they run 16.6667% slower, and that includes the music. And they also have these huge borders on the top and bottom. It does let us zoom in to present them in widescreen. So with that out of the way, let's continue. As soon as you turn on your Mega Drive console with the cartridge inside, you're greeted by the game selection, and a tune that is iconic to anyone that has picked up one of these compilations. The theme comes from the game World Cup Italia 90, so we'll start there. The Italia 90 tournament holds a special place in the hearts of many, myself included. Nessun Dorma, Baggio's Goal, Tears of Gaza, and Rijkaard's Gobs. So naturally, us Europeans love a good old footy game, so it's no surprise that Paco Pastor selected this as one of the titles for the compilation. Europe was the only region to get the World Cup license. Elsewhere, it was known as World Cup Soccer, World Championship Soccer, and Sega Soccer. So how does it play? This is your standard top-down affair, much like titles like Kickoff and Sensible Soccer. But it's a game that's comparatively fairly light on nuance. There's no fouls, no free kicks, no offsides, no cards, and no subs. You have 3 buttons to pass, shoot, and chip, and basically that's it. The gameplay is chunky. The goalkeepers are superhuman, if you're on the computer side, and the tactics are incredibly basic. Now personally, I absolutely adore this game. I have very fond memories of playing it as a kid and of taking England to the World Cup glory after a blistering 5-all semi-final against the USSR that ended with a penalty shootout. But even I have to admit that this game is incredibly basic. And once you realise that crossing across the 18-yard box will almost always end with a goal, it all becomes a little too easy. That said, I don't think this game is as bad as many say it is today, and gets 2 players together and it's incredibly fun, especially since there's no fouls in the game, and it has a fantastic penalty shootout system. Is it a classic? Well, No, but its simple gameplay and iconic license captured the hearts of many, and that music is also simply sensational. Just listen to it. In the wake of the unprecedented success of Tetris, Sega was one of many who wanted a piece of the puzzle pie, and Columns was snapped up from coder Jay Gersten by Sega in 1989 with an arcade release and ports to all Sega home hardware of the time. So, if you're looking to make a compilation of games with an appeal as broad as possible, you've got your sports title, which reflects the most popular sport in the world of the time, tick, and then you need a mass market puzzle game. Columns does indeed tick that box. Columns itself is simply a match-free tile puzzle game. Stacks of 3 differently coloured jewels descend from the top of the play area, and players must match 3 horizontally, vertically or diagonally to remove them. Fail to remove them and they stack up, and if all of your jewels hit the top, then it's game over. You can play with 2 players, but it's done in parallel rather than competitively or cooperatively, so there's no real interactivity between the 2 players. Really, it's basic, but ultimately it's extremely addictive and very charming. The music is wonderfully chill, and the whole game is wrapped up in this ancient Greek digital aesthetic which has a real vibe to it. It's definitely a Sega icon, and one that is well remembered by Sega fans of the era, and it's a shame that in the wake of Puyo Puyo Tetris, Columns seems to have been largely forgotten by Sega themselves. The arcade in the home was always Sega's ambition, and we've discussed superscalers on the Master System on the channel before. Super Hangon was ported to the Mega Drive during the system's first year, and wow, this is a poster child for what the Mega Drive could really do. We'd had Space Harrier 2 and Super Thunderblade before, which had disappointed to varying degrees, but Super Hangon delivered what looked like an arcade-perfect rendition of the Outrun board powered game. Aside from some differences in colour, as well as the absence of true sprite scaling, this is almost the arcade game in your home. All the courses are there, as are all the music tracks, and the bike looks exactly as it should. Not only was this the full fat arcade experience, but there was a huge original mode added in just to complement it, and that let you race original courses and upgrade your bike, which starts off as a slow moving, poorly handling POS, and can evolve into an absolute monster on 2 wheels. This was a mode that players could sink hours into, and the slower bike and more forgiving starting courses helped train new players for the main arcade game, while the end game appealed to those Hang-On masters. Super Hang-On is definitely the highlight of the pack, and while as kids we bemoaned the lack of a 2-player mode, in hindsight this is one of the best superscaler games on the Mega Drive, and just an absolutely sensational racing game in general. So in the end, we have a stunning arcade conversion, a great puzzle game, and an enjoyable, yet decidedly average soccer game. Ultimately, the quality of the games isn't the overriding factor here, as they could be described as mixed for the most part. But a better way of looking at this is that these games were curated to appeal to the mass market, to give recent adopters of the Sega Mega Drive a small library of games for their new console. These were games that were sufficiently old enough that this compilation wouldn't hurt their sales, which is more than what could be said for following compilations. Yes, there was a Mega Games 2 and 3 and more beyond that, but we shall get into those another time. Because they would not exist if it was not for the roaring success of Mega Games 1. It's a release that is often unheralded, but for many of us European Mega Drive fans, it's as much a part of the console's identity as a certain blue hedgehog. These days it's all too easy to sneer at this value pack of older titles, but when we were young gamers with access to far less games, this triple pack was something of a blessing. And whatever opinions may be about these games in the modern day, They all formed part of our identity as Sega Mega Drive owners and players. For an entire generation of Sega fans, this menu and that rendition of the World Cup Italia 90 music will unlock a feeling of a time over 3 decades ago when we were all just huddled in front of our tiny CRTs, whiling away our childhood as we basked in some of our earliest experiences of Sega Mega Drive magic. And that is why these games will always be Mega. This has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the Sega side.